We'll be talking about AWS developer tools, CI/CD, right? Just if you look at where we were before, so all the while we've been doing things manually. We'll continue to do manual things from now until more or less like to the end of the class, right? But it's good we know that we can do those same things with IAC, infrastructure as code, right? But again, for the most part, many of the things you as an infra person, because you are managing the infra, you build those things as infra as code, but that's not all. A lot of times you have developers, right, who have like their own application that you need to host in the cloud, right? Because the whole conversation here is really hosting in the cloud. And that's where you need like a set of developer tools that helps you help developers, right? Because that's really our work. We support developers a lot, right? Apart from supporting the business, we're supporting the developers, making sure that their code gets to the destination on time, right? Whether it needs to be tested, whether it needs to be, we need to prove that it's reliable, all those sort of good stuff, right? Which is where developer tools comes in the form of CI/CD. Okay. So what are we going to be looking at today? We'll basically look at all the CI/CD tools AWS has, and we'll see practical demo. We'll see code commits, although it's not a thing again, but I'll just mention it, right? Code build, code deploy, code pipeline. You can see all the code, right? So it's code commits, code build, code deploy, code pipeline. So just take note of it, right? It's all talking about code. And that's why I'm also mentioning the fact that you need to know GitHub, right? GitHub is popularly known for a place where you keep code for collaboration, right? It means anytime you need to talk about any of these tools here, it makes more sense if it's in the context of a collaborative platform like GitHub or whichever, whether it's bits. I think there are different options out there, right? But GitHub is the most popular. We'll see. We will not be able to go through all of them, but as part of this series, I think we'll talk about artifact management, session management, systems manager. We'll also look at like configuration management, and then we'll see like CI/CD best practices, and then real-world DevOps, which is actually what we're also going to show as part of the call. Okay. So what are the challenges? Like I said, most times whatever we do in the cloud is not new to the cloud. It's just that now the cloud is our new home, right? It means that on-prem people have concept of building developer more or less like CI/CDs, right, or developer tool. It has always existed, even on-prem. But you have to do it again in the cloud if that's where everybody's moving to, right? And the whole idea is what are the tools supporting it? So traditionally, you will deploy. If you think about how we deployed our S3 bucket, right? It was code. We created a bunch of more or less like manually we created things, right? And then we just connected them. But that's not how it works in the real world, because in the real world you have developers that are working on this code, right, simultaneously. And sometimes somebody will finish his own work and be like, okay, I'm done with my work. He'll push to an upstream branch. That branch will be merged. There's a certain flow that needs to happen for the actual code to get to the final destination, right? And yeah, in the past, usually there's a lot of manual stuff, maybe some copying, some pasting, some FTPing. Maybe you do like an FTP connection to push the files, right? But again, if you look at many of the problems, it's still related to all the things we said about IC, right? Lack of automated testing is one. Collaboration is also another problem, right? And that's why I said this is where that's where code collaboration becomes important for this subject, because if you were doing that manually, it becomes hard for code management or even collaboration, right? It's also time consuming if you have to do that manually. Poor visibility also into when you deploy something. Is it broken? What's happening around it? And what's the solution? Developer tools, basically. So more or less like to just to manage that process, right? So what it means is that from once the developer is done with their code, there is just an automated process that takes that to wherever it's deployed, right? Whether you want to call it production, whether you want to call it staging or dev environment, all that is your own naming convention. But the most important thing is the collaboration is happening, and then you're pushing code to a final destination, right? AWS has a lot of solutions I will see that does that, fully managed CI/CD services. You can do automated testing, do deployment. It makes it really consistent, repeatable, right? The process is consistent, repeatable. And the whole idea is that if it's in code and you've deployed it, you can always deploy it again and again, right? So it's consistent, it's repeatable, right? And then you can do security, whether it's scanning the code or scanning the deployment, whatever you want to do, you can, right? And again, when you think about CI, right, continuous integration, really what you just need to know about continuous integration is really where that collaboration happens, right? Integration is you are integrating a set of code to a final destination. So it's more or less like, for example, there could be like a master branch or a staging branch that everyone is collaborating, and that branch is like the final destination. And most times you push changes there. Some tests will happen, some build will happen, right? That's really where the continuous integration comes in. But delivery itself is when all that has happened and it needs to get into deployment. So deployment is what makes it a CD, right? But the CI itself is just all the process that needs to happen before the code is integrated into. So you need to, if you want to read more, you can read more, but it's easy to understand, right? And that brings us to code pipeline. So if you think about it in AWS, if you were to do that, right, because ideally code will be somewhere people are collaborating, but once they are done, what happens next? The code needs to get to the final destination, right? So there's really code pipeline in the picture there, right? Because in there you can do CI, which is more or less like the continuous integration part that I just mentioned, right? So everything around building the code, everything around running the tests, right? all that is going to happen around that phase. So you push a change, there is a build process that happens. Maybe you need to package the application as a Java application, or you want to build a Docker image. Whatever you want to do, you can do it as part of the build, right? Testing could also be part of it. And if any of those steps fail, you can decide not to progress, right? And then when you move that into delivery and deployment, right? Which is more or less like the automation is really what you need to think about here, right? And you see it from the demo how we've done it practically and how we can just add some juice to it, and it makes it really easy, right? The automation is really icing the fact that it becomes from collaboration to deployment, right? All automated. You don't need to, because in the ideal world, when people push their change, nobody's overseeing it. It just goes to where it should be. It's meant to be, right? Reduce time to market is something you should think about, right? Because now it's automated. When you push your change, it gets deployed. It means that there's no manual intervention that is required, right? So if you look at AWS, there's a set of tools in there. Code commit is there. Code commit is now gone, but I'll just mention it so that if you see it anywhere, it was once a thing, right? CodeBuild, CodeDeploy, CodePipeline, they are all fully managed, right? Fully managed service. It's scalable. They are also very secure, right? So on the right, I just showed an image. Ideally, you have a GitHub repo, which is where everybody's working from, right? But once they push a change, that change probably will go through some testing, some building, and all that. And if all that is good, maybe if it's merged, right? Maybe after the build process has passed, you can merge the code. Once you merge the code, it gets pushed to more or less like using CodeDeploy or using another tool you have in the pipeline to deploy the actual code to production or staging or whatever you want to call it, right? I won't talk so much about code commit. It's no longer there. And that's why I said, please understand GitHub. It's not hard to learn, especially if you're just starting. It's not hard, please. Code commit used to be another Git. It used to be another Git, right? It used to be like AWS own Git, right? But it's no longer a thing. It has been discontinued, so I won't talk more about it. But if you ever see it in any of the questions or anywhere you find, if you want to read about it, you can read about it. But it used to be a fully managed Git-based source control, right? But please learn Git. Try and just understand at least the basics of Git and how to, if you have like a repo there, you can clone it, you can push, you can do, very basic stuff, honestly. And if you want to go advanced, you can also, okay? So I'm not going to spend much time about it. I just left this slide. If you are curious and you wanted to know, but code commit used to be like a Git that AWS had, like more or less their own Git, right? But now they've decommissioned it. I think AWS is also trying to make sure they keep the things they want to manage and just let go of the things that they feel there's already a solution out there that does it better. Okay, so we won't talk more about it, but that's where CodeBuild comes in, because we said as part of the pipeline there is a stage where build has to happen, right? Remember that programming languages, there are so many. It means that the build requirement for one programming language is going to be different from the build requirement from another programming language, right? Which is why there is need for you to build the code, right? So build, but again, it's code build, but you can do whatever you want to do there, right? The whole idea is that it's fully managed. It's a service that helps you compile your code, right? Remember, it's not like magic. You still have to say how is my code going to be compiled. So if it was a Python app or a Java app, is basically a set of instructions that you put there that will decide how the application will be compiled, right? Built. In there, you can also run tests, right? CodeBuild can allow you to do that. So you can use that step to also build. You can also create another step in CodeBuild that can do the test. Just know a pipeline basically that we mentioned at the beginning is just the orchestrator. Basically, put all these things together, right? You can have like a build step, a test step, all in the pipeline, right? And we're going to see. It's basically serverless. You don't need to manage anything. It scales on its own. There's pre-configured environment. So if you have if you are working, with a particular environment, you can basically just bootstrap and get started. You don't need to build from scratch. But you can also set up your own custom environment, right? So no build servers to manage. Continuous scaling, pay-as-you-go pricing, meaning it's basically build time. So how long you spend building your code, that's what you pay for. If you're not building, you don't pay anything, right? We've seen that with all the serverless models we've worked with. It's obviously integrated with all the other AWS services. The whole idea is that you can, have a login, logs attached to it, or you can have notification built. So it's supported. Like there's a lot of ecosystem around AWS that also supports CodeBuild, right? So ideally, in a CodeBuild file, there is really nothing much that goes in, right? So on the right, I did put like a valid CodeBuild file, right? We'll see our own, but basically it's just a spec for CodeBuild, because if CodeBuild wants to run, like I said, it's like a test file or a build file, like a test or build process, right? So it means that it needs a set of commands to basically run. So for example, there is like an install step, right? That tells it, what do you need to install, where to install dependencies. There's like a pre-build step, commands before the build itself, right? And there's like the build step to show, what's being built in this case. And then there's a post-build, right? You may use some of them, you may not use them, but it's all there, and you can, right? Artifacts, obviously, you can specify, like, when something is built, at the end of the day, it needs to push like record, like it needs to push more or less like an artifact somewhere. So you can store those artifacts. You can also have environment variables to control, like control when it's running. You can actually have, so that you don't have everything static, right? You can control things based on environment. You can say if it's prod, maybe this is where to fetch the data from. Maybe you need to fetch like a prod S3 bucket. You get that from prod, right? And then use that instead of specifying it statically, right? So you can use that to improve like how things happen dynamically. You can also employ caching, right? So cache things, because we always, if you're building and maybe something is not changing that much, you can cache it, right? And just reuse all that. So example use case, obviously you can use it to install. You can use it as an installation step for you to install your package. You can use it to run tests, and then you can pretty much create deployment package. We will use CodeBuild on this call to create a deployment. But what it just means is that there is no limitation. It's a build service, so you can choose whatever you want to do in there. But we'll use it for even a deployment, right? And so when you now think about code build, right, building the code itself, you now talk about code deploy. What is code deploy? Basically now to deploy, right? Deploy code. But I think I was mentioning at the beginning that the only thing I feel people confuse between code deploy and elastic beanstalk is just the fact that code deploy can actually deploy to your on-premise machines, right? That's one thing beanstalk cannot do. So please, if you just know that beanstalk is pretty much AWS, like it builds, you can push your, like more or less like you can push your code, but it's all AWS. You can't point beanstalk to an on-premise environment, but CodeBuild can do that, right? So it's a deployment service for your application, right? You can deploy to EC2 on-premise, Lambda, and ECS, okay? And then you can coordinate basically the deployment itself across the computes, right? So what it means is that you can even do deployment across not just one compute, but multiple. If you have like a change that needs to go to a set of EC2 instance, you can coordinate that, right? Obviously, CodeBuild has so many advanced features that we'll see at some point, but you can do rollback, you can do monitoring, right? You can do blue-green, because in the cloud world, everything that has a deployment has like a deployment model. Sometimes you're doing like a rolling update, sometimes you're doing blue-green, sometimes you're doing immutable deploys. It's just like, how do you want to get the change out, right? But the most important thing you need to know is that most deployment services would always support a way for you to make your deployment smooth, right? Because deployment is about there's a change and you're pushing a new change. You have to make sure that if people are using the existing change, you don't cause a lot of impact when you're bringing the new change, right? So what it means is that something is really doing your deployment, and right, the reduced downtime is one thing you can also talk about. And again, your deployment will always be consistent, right? Because the thing is that it's always from a collaboration place, right? So it's like a change that is fixed, and you can always redeploy or deploy it even to multiple places, right? It's also serverless. You only pay for the underlying compute that is used, right? You're not really managing anything. But just so you know that at like code deploy itself, you'll be seeing many agents in AWS as time goes on. Just know that code deploy is not magic. It needs code deploy on the EC2 instance, for example, which is a software that helps it communicate to the code deploy service for it to do its thing. Okay, and we're going to see a sample. But the only idea is that there is like a software that is running on the machine. If that machine is not running there, if that package is not running, there's no way code deploy is going to know. Okay, so it communicates with the deploy service, right? And that's actually how it knows to basically run the deployment. Okay. It's the one that runs the deployment status. It's pre-installed in many of the AMI, especially Linux, the Amazon Linux AMIs, right? And for some other operating systems, you need to install it, right? But we just saw that you can install it, you can have it inside of your EC2. You can also have it on-premise, right? So it means that even on-premise, if you needed to deploy something from AWS to your on-premise environment, you just need to create that. You just need to have that code deploy agent running there and create that connection. And once it happens, the deployment can go there, right? IAM role obviously is required. We'll see it from the practical. Health checks, you can have health check basically that monitors the application during deployment, that knows when it's succeeded or when it's failing, right? AppSpec. So one thing you should know is that we just talked about the build spec. There is also an AppSpec. An AppSpec is basically how is deployment going to happen? So like things like before install, after install, when the application starts, what needs to happen for the application to start? What needs to happen if I need to validate the service to be sure that it's running as expected, right? So just so you know that just the way we saw build spec, there is also an AppSpec. An AppSpec is what CodeDeploy needs to tell it exactly how to treat the deployment. Okay, so it defines deployment actions and lifecycle hooks. So those lifecycle hooks, they can be very advanced, but honestly, it's just a set of steps that needs to happen. And we'll see from the sample, you see the events that are happening and exactly which script it is calling, right? Obviously what I have on the right is just a sample. Like you specify the OS, you specify a set of files that needs to be copied from one place to the other, and then you give it hooks to say run this set of instructions, right? Depending on which stage you are, right? So like application stop, before install, after install, application start, right? And then you can pretty much do other things like even setting up permissions, right, for those files. And then there is it's platform specific, which means that depending on which platform you're doing, whether it's EC2, Lambda, ECS, you can build the specific AppSpec file that it needs, right? With that said, CodePipeline is what brings everything together, right? There is a build, there is a test, there is a deploy, there is like a point where you can even notify somebody. You can say, okay, this pipeline wants to build to production. Okay, we finished testing, we finished building. But at this point, maybe someone who is more senior needs to approve this change before it goes live to production, right? So you can even have manual workflows like approval steps, it's just a pipeline. It's what orchestrates everything together, right? But the most important thing you need to know is that code pipeline itself is just it's like the orchestrator, right? But in there you have like build process happening, deploy process happening, maybe notification process happening, all sort of goodies, right? That can happen. It's just it itself is just an automated pipeline, right? Like so, the diagram I do have here has like a GitHub, like a place, a repository. I was mentioning code commits, but I think I've mentioned yeah. So in this case, we're going to use Git. But the whole idea is that there's code living in Git, and then you make a change, you push a change there, and for that reason, the source is pulled down, and from there, a number of steps happen, right? And it's also visual. You can see it. You can see where you are, the pipeline, what is happening, what is failing, what is succeeding, and all that, right? Obviously, it integrates with a lot of AWS services, meaning you can have notifications that tells you if a particular step failed, if the entire pipeline failed or it succeeded. So there's a lot of integration. You can even trigger a pipeline from an event. So there is just so many integration with all the other AWS services, right? You can obviously run in parallel if you wanted. Like I said, there is like so you can have stages where you run in parallel or you run them sequentially, right? You can also have like manual approval, right, for a pipeline to say, okay, we're done with everything, but are we good to deploy? Maybe someone needs to approve it, right? You can have that. And then you can also more or less like share artifacts, right? From one stage to the other, you can share artifacts. So if something is used in a stage before the next stage, you can pretty much share those artifacts between them, right? CloudWrite events integration, like I mentioned, if a step should fail, who should be notified? What should happen? All that can be built in. The benefit is obviously there, right? Faster delivery, improved quality, and reduce risk, right? So yeah, so that brings us to like a very good segue to go into what we should be doing today. So I'll just take you back to the repo. I think in the past we've used this repo extensively, especially for our builders day. We've used this repo, but I've made some changes. So if you see here, this demo underscore S3, I think if you remember, this is exactly what we did, right? We did more or less like created a V1, V2, created an S3 bucket, pushed file there, and just basically did static hosting, right? But in the real world, I don't think anybody does that because everyone will start from a GitHub repo. That's where everyone is collaborating. So if you think of every one of us in this call, maybe we're in a team, we're all building this project, we're all pushing our changes, we're all reviewing our changes. If anything, if more or less like if your change is good to go, somebody merges it, right? And then when you merge, there is a pipeline somewhere that is listening to that and just doing its thing. Maybe it's running a test, a build, whatever it needs to do, right, for that change to happen. Okay. So the only thing I've done is that, so we'll start with, first of all, we'll start with a pipeline, and then we'll start with a build. So let's go through the build first of all. Let's go through the build. Let's go through the build file. This build file is similar to the one that I shared. I won't have time to go through the build because we don't have much time for me to go through everything, right? But the whole idea is just simple, right? We have a build spec file that wants to deploy the same things we've done manually before, right? So if you see it here, it's a very simple build file. It's located in this direction, in this directory, right? We are saying that for installation, we need Python 3.11. For commands, more or less like this is like the install phase, right? And there is also the pre-build phase. We're just doing a bunch of things, right? But one thing you'll notice is that at the build phase itself is where I'm saying copy index.html to a bucket and let it be index.html. Copy error.html to a bucket. If you remember exactly how we did it, we created a bucket. I had to give you a set of files. You downloaded it. You uploaded it again, right? In this case, I'm not doing that because I'm looking at a repo and I'm saying the file that you have here, push it to an S3 bucket, right? So I'm just using this part to do like a step to push all the files. Once that is done, there's like a post build step that I'm running. And here I'm saying that I know every time you push that change, you need to invalidate the CloudFront, right? Because that's how I get my latest change, right? CloudFront is cached, right? So that's what I'm doing here. So I'm saying post build, once this build happens, please invalidate the cache. We did this. So if you notice, there was a time we did version 2, it wasn't changing. We had to go back, we had to invalidate the cache, and then we started seeing, so we're doing it all by code here. So how will this look like? We just need to go back to our console. So we'll start from a pipeline. So we'll go to a pipeline. Remember, CodeBuild can stay on its own, right? CodeDeploy can also stay on its own, right? But we just want to show that they make more sense just having a pipeline do everything for you, right? So what we'll do is that we'll create a pipeline. And in this case, I'm going to use more or less like a custom pipeline, right? There are some pipelines you can take advantage of here, but I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to take a custom pipeline. So I'll call it my TikTok pipeline. So that's what I'm going to call it. In this case, I'll leave it as queued. New service role, right? So like as with everything in AWS, you need like a role, right? That can do, because everything is always fine grained. You can lock it down, right? So a pipeline will also need a role to know exactly what to do, right? To know what it has access to and what it doesn't, right? So that's why we need one. So we'll just create it. It will create it on our behalf. For the advanced settings, honestly, there's nothing I need to care about. So this is where I choose my source, right? So I need a source, right? And this is why I was talking about collaboration. You need some sort of collaboration, right? So in this case, I'm going to use a GitHub app, right? I obviously don't have an existing connection. It means I need to connect this pipeline to a GitHub repo, right? So that it can track my change. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to GitHub. So there's need for a connection. And here, connection name, let me see. Um, okay, let me just give it a, let me give it a connection. So I'm just going to connect to GitHub, do this. In this case, I'll say install a new app. The reason is because I don't have an app, right? So I have this repo, which is the one we're doing a demo from. It's asking me for password. I'm just going to do that. Here it's asking me for which repo, like I want to give permission. In this case, I'm just going to give it permission to just this repo, right? This one. So I'm just going to do, what is it saying? Select repo all, or select only this one, right? Save. I don't know why that UI was doing that, but I did select the repo that I wanted to give permission. It has given me connect like an app ID, TikTok connection. I'll just connect, right? So at this point, I've connected my pipeline to a source, right? So every other thing I can leave as I can more or less like, but here I need to choose like repo, which repo? In this case, it's CCP, right? This is the same CCP repo. Here we choose a branch. If you check there is only one branch. So if you check here, for example, there is only one branch. There's just the main branch, right? There is just the main branch. So that's where I'm saying keep track of that branch. And then I'll do next. So once I'm here, there is basically, some things I can use here, more or less like the build, right? Like a build stage. But I will use um, like other build providers. So here there is room for me to like provide commands what I want to do, but I actually want to use CodeBuild, right? And the reason is just because I already have like my build spec, everything is defined there that I want to use, right? So I'm going to say other providers. In this case, I'm going to use CodeBuild, right? In this place, it's going to ask me for a project. It needs like a build project to use, which is where I need to create one. So I'm just going to create a build project on the left. So what do we call this project? We're going to call it let's say TikTok build. Let's call it a build project, right? So TikTok build project. Default project. Let's say additional configuration. I can leave that on demand managed image, right? You can use your own custom image if you wanted. On demand, EC2 compute type container is fine. Everything is fine. I can basically use all the default, right? Remember, again, it's also creating a role, meaning the code build itself needs its own role to do its thing. So it's going to be there. Additional configuration, I can leave these as default for now. Trust me. And then insert build commands. No, in this case, I could actually insert the command that I want to run, right? But here I'm going to use a build spec file, right? So which is what I mentioned at the beginning, that a build spec is really what ties it up. But here I have to be careful because ideally it expects my build spec to be at the root location. But in this case, it's not, right? It's not. My build spec is actually slash build as the S3 demo underscore S3. So it has a different path. So I'm going to copy that and let me just be sure I am still there. So I'm going to paste the path of my build spec, right? So it's build as the S3 demo underscore S3 build spec.yaml, right? Define batch configuration, CloudWatch logs. Pretty much we need that because we need to see a log. There needs to be a log for us to know what's exactly happening, right? So I'm just going to create that project and say continue to code pipeline, right? So it's creating that the project itself that's going to manage code build, and then I'll say I'll leave, right? So here it has created. Now it has selected it already. So TikTok build project, right? So it has selected it. And then I'm just going to do my region is US West. Let's say it's US West, US West 2. So it's this one, right? That's where I am. Project name. Oh, did I just? Oh, okay, no worries. I think I'll just stay in this region. I thought I was doing stuff in US West 2. So I'm just going to stay at the old region. It looks like I'm in a different region completely. So I almost lost that. I did lose that. What do you call it? I did lose that project. Let me look for it. Let me see. Where was it created? It looks like I did lose. Is it this one? I can't even find the project that I just created now. Let me look for the right region. I thought I was using this. Let me see. Okay. Let me look for my build. So I'll look for my build projects. Let me see the ones that I have. Sorry, build projects. I'm gonna close this one. Let's see the projects that I have. So I have one here, right? And it's in this region. So I'm not sure why it's now not showing again. Let me see. Okay. What I can do is I can just refresh this page. No, I think I did. Yeah, it's not showing. Let me just create a new one. So I'll just take note of the place I am. So I'm just going to give it TikTok pipeline, right? I may not have to specify many of the things that I've done before because I have it. So I'm just going to leave everything as default. I'll go there. I'll do the source as GitHub app. I'm going to use my existing connection. We've created it before. The repo will be this. The branch is going to be main. I'm just going to do next, right? I'll use a build provider in this case. I'm going to use CodeBuild. We've seen all this step before, right? It's just that I missed. So I'm going to use, now I'm seeing the project populate very well. I don't know. I think if they had like a refresh button, it would have made sense here, right? Here you can do more or less like, build spec override, but we don't need it. Here I'm going to leave it as is. And the source artifact is really what it's going to take. Remember, at the beginning, we defined the source, which is Git in this case. It's going to fetch the file. And here we're just saying, what is the input artifact for the build process? And here we're just going to leave it as a source, right? We'll do next. Test provider, right now we don't have, so we can skip the test stage, right? Deploy, we don't also have. So we'll skip the deploy, okay? Once we do that, we'll create a pipeline. We'll create a pipeline. So it's creating. But again, I think I did miss a step here, and it's fine, right? It's just for me to show you exactly what we want to do, because now we just created, we did see a spec file, right? We did see a build spec file that had, it needs an S3 bucket. We don't have one. We have to create one. It needs a CloudFront distribution. We also don't have one, so we have to. So while that pipeline is building, I know it's going to fail. All this is going to fail because it needs a bucket, and it also needs like a, what do you call it? It needs a CloudFront distribution. We don't have all that. So we are just going to create a bucket. So I'm going to go to S3. I'm going to do I'm going to open S3 and create a bucket. So I'm just going to, I think this is normal step. We've seen that before. I'm just going to call it TikTok S3, I don't know, like S3 whatever bucket, right? We'll just name it that, right? We'll leave everything as default, block everything, no version. But many of those good things that we used to do when we create like a bucket, just keep it blocked, right? We also need a CDN, right? We need a CDN. I think we've done this in the past manually. We'll just create, in this case, we'll just create a CDN. We don't even need to do all the integration. So we're going to create one. I'm just going to call this one TikTok CDN, right? We'll call it a TikTok TikTok CDN. I change keyboards a lot, so my CDN application, whatever it is. It's a single web app. I'll keep the domain, more or less like, yeah, just leave it as is. So what next? We basically need, how it is that CDN points to an S3. It usually points to it, but yeah, you can have S3 as one of the origins, right? So we're just going to browse and choose that bucket. So we have that bucket, we choose it. Origin path, I think I've explained why you don't need one, especially if you're pointing to S3, right? So here we'll leave the default, right? It will write a policy in S3 that allows it to get from S3, right? So CloudFront is going to, at this point, write a policy to the S3 bucket that allows you to read data, only CloudFront will read data, which is good. So I'm just going to do next, right? I don't need any security stuff to be added. And then I'm just going to create a distribution, okay? I'm going to create a distribution. So while the distribution is getting created, I also want to change something. And if you've been part of my class, I think because of the new UI, you notice that sometimes you need to pretty much do like the what do you call it, the homepage, right? So the default, so that the user doesn't have to provide it. So I'm just going to use index.html, which is like the default homepage. So I'm going to save this, right? So this is done. So we've created an S3 bucket, empty S3 bucket. There's nothing inside. We've also created a CloudFront distribution, empty CloudFront. The only thing we did was to connect both. And truly, you have to, right? At some point, a CloudFront needs an origin. So in this case, we are saying your origin is basically S3, right? So there's a bucket is tied to. So once that is done, we need to go back to our pipeline. So you can see source is fine, meaning that the source is good. It pulled the change from GitHub, right? It did. But if you check the build is failing. This is at the point where you now need to start thinking, okay, what's happening, right? And that's why I'm showing you this, so that you see it as instead of you seeing it work, you need to actually see what are the things you can have. So if I go to build and I do build history, right? So I'm going to open it on the left. It will show me the build that just happened, right? So there's this one that is failing now. This is this is 34 seconds ago. So that's the one I want to check. So you can actually look at the steps. So if for example, if I zoom in a bit, you will see that running command echo installing AWS CLI. So that means it's working, right? It's working because this command was gotten from afar. So it's gotten from installing AWS CLI. So if you check at some point, there is like installing AWS CLI there. So it's good. This build spec is already active. It has been pulled in already and it's doing its thing. So we need to now know what is happening. Why is it failing? If you scroll down a bit, scroll down to where there's red, you pretty much will start seeing things like, for example, it's saying, if you see this clearly, you see that, for example, it's saying, yeah, you can see something like this. So I'm sure you can see it clearly. But one thing you see here is that there's an S3 underscore bucket, right? That we're trying to run a command. So we're trying to copy this file. It sees the file, so it's seeing this file, but it's trying to push it to a bucket, and the bucket is not there. Right? This is a variable and not an actual bucket, right? So that brings us to something else. We need to be able to now set those things like as environment variables in this case, right? So CodeBuild, we can actually provide environment variables that shows what S3 underscore bucket should be, right? So what we can do is that we can go back to the project in this case, Let's go to the pipeline. I think we need to go to the pipeline. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go to the pipelines. I'm going to go to this one. I'll click on it. I was there before. I'll just edit it, right? So this is like the full pipeline, but I'm interested in this stage, the build stage, this one that is here, because that's the one that is failing. So if I click on edit stage and I do this, like edit, one thing is this is where you see room for you to add environment variables, right? So there is like an add environment variable. So in this case, I know the environment variables I need because here I'm actually using s3 underscore bucket, right? So I'm going to copy s3 underscore bucket. I'll paste it. I also need one more, right? Which is the CloudFront distribution ID, right? So I'm going to add a new environment variable, paste that one, and then let's go and get our ID. So in this case, we'll go to distributions, and we have an ID that is here. We'll copy this one, right? And we'll paste it here. What about the bucket? We'll go to S3, and we will go to S3, and then look for a bucket, the bucket we just created. If I knew the name offhand, I could have used it, but I'm just trying to be, just to make sure I'm copying the right thing. So I'll go back here. I would paste the bucket, right? And then I'll do done, right? Save. So once I've saved it, I'll save the pipeline, right? And then once I save the pipeline, what if, there is like a step that says maybe start rollback, or maybe you can retry the stage, right? In this case, we fixed something, so we know what was the error. We'll fix it, so we'll retry it again. So in this case, I think it's going to start. Let's see, retry the stage. I'm not sure if it's going to retry, but let me see. Retry failed action. It's not already superseded. Yeah, it's not retrying, but I mean it's easy to retry, right? It's basically easy to retry. So if I edit this file, for example, which is the power of what we are building, right? Because now instead of me doing all that manually, I can basically just commit this, that I updated the spec file, right? So once I did this, I just did a commit, and what I'm expecting is that this pipeline should start building again. This one, if you notice, there is a source. It has been updated immediately. Like it was too fast to even capture, but if you can see it, the source is actually update build spec. That's the commit that changed it. So if I actually click on it, for example, I think there's a way it can actually take you to GitHub for you to see. Yeah, it took me there. So it's actually this change that triggered that pipeline. So the pipeline will start again, and then let it start running. So we'll just go back to the build project again, right? So we'll go to the build project, and then we'll see the next one that is running. If we check here, there is a new one. Let's click on it. So let's see if we've made progress from where we were before. So if you remember before, we were pretty much, okay. So the error we had before is different. If you take note, all right, it's different. If you look at this error closely, the first one really could not find the bucket. That's number one. But in this one, it's actually trying to do things. It's trying to put buckets. It's trying to put an object, but it's saying that it's not authorized. And when you see a non-authorized, you know what that means. It just means there's a permission that is failing. And what are you supposed to do? You have to look for this rule, this one here. There is a CodeBuild rule, which this CodeBuild is using. Right? Everything in AWS is permission driven. It means that even this CodeBuild has a role it is using, and that role needs to have the permission to put file into the S3 bucket. So let's go and look for that role. So I'm going to do IAM, and while I'm there, I'm just going to do two things, right? I'm just going to do things so that we don't repeat it. But I'm showing you this so that you can know that these things are things you can always troubleshoot. Whatever the problem is, you can fix it, right? So I'm going to look for CodeBuild. And if we check, I think it's this one. It's the TikTok build project that we just created, all right? It has a set of permission, but I'm going to add two more. So I'm going to go attack policies. In this case, I'm going to give it S3 full access. So S3 full access, right? And then I'm also going to give it, CloudFront, because I know it's also going to do things with CloudFront, right? Right now, I don't have the time it takes for me to create like a custom policy for that, right? Because ideally, I'm supposed to give it like a custom policy, meaning just do this action. But in this case, for the demo, I'll just use full access, okay? So I've added two permissions. I'm just going to add. So in this case, this was what was there before, but now we've given it full access to S3. We've also given it full access to CloudFront. Now that that is in place, let's go back to our pipeline. So it has failed again, right? So let's see if it is retryable this time. So yeah, we can retry it. So it's retrying, and let's go back to the build projects and see the build project that is building. So we're just going to go one step backward to the project, see all the builds. There is one that is running now. It's 8 seconds, so we're just going to watch it. So you can always keep track of it. That's why cloud, there is like an integration for you to see the logs. But the whole idea is that you can see it. You can see every stage it is, right? Whatever it's doing. All these were from the build spec. They were all from the command. But remember, what's the goal here? The goal is that we had a CloudFront, we had an S3 bucket, and that was it. The application itself that needs to live in those places, it's the developers that are building it. So as part of the role, your role in the cloud, you have to find a way. And this is one deployment pattern. There are so many, right? Whether it's around EKS, but it's the same mindset. It's going to be driven from code. The changes are going to happen in code, but there's a pipeline that is really watching, that is listening, and then that is triggering. It depends. Pipelines can get complex, but Once you understand the basic detail, the fundamentals behind it, it's easy for you to extend it, right? So let's continue. Here we're just going to see. It looks like it's finished, right? So it looks like the pipeline actually successfully completed. So you can see succeeded. It's still showing like it's building, but I can see that the build step has actually concluded. So what can we verify? We have to go to CloudFront distribution, check on this one, check on invalidation. There is one invalidation that just happened. I did not do this manually, right? This happened automatically. What about the S3 bucket? Let's see the file. So the file, if you go to the file, there are 3 files that I did not add manually, right? So how do we know if it's working? We basically now need to just check go here, look for the distribution name, and paste it in the browser, right? And that's it. We're live, right? So if you think about how we did this in the past, this is the same thing we did manually. We had to create the CloudFront, we had to create the S3 bucket, we had to do all these things manually upload. But now, just with a repo that had all the files that we needed and all the integrations that we needed to have, we have application live, right? And the question is, somebody will say, why is this a big deal? It is a big deal because now what it means is that what do you think is going to happen if I change this file while we're on this call, right? So there is like a builders did demo, right? So let's go back to GitHub and say, let's go to this file, for example. Let's look for that index.html file that is being controlled, right? So we're just going to change it here. I'm just going to edit this file and do builders did demo TikTok. Let's do TikTok TikTok. I don't know. I used to like to put TikTok updates in everything I'm doing here, but like TikTok name. But let's do TikTok update and save, right? So we just commit the changes, right? So I would just say updated or updated the header, right? Okay, so we're just going to do that, and then I'll just commit it. So honestly, in the real world, this is you'll be doing this from your CLI, right? I'm just showing you from the GUI so that we don't really, it's not a Git class, but these things are basic. Git commit, Git pull, Git push. They are basic things you should learn as part of your journey. Okay, so I did push that change without doing anything. I know it's going to trigger my pipeline. So the pipeline has started triggering the build step. It's happening. I don't know why there's still this whatever this is happening, but let's see. It looks like the source has finished. The build is happening now, so there's one more progress. I can see it. If you look at this commit, it's the one that I just finished, right? The update header. So let's wait for this build process. Let's let it finish. But the whole idea is just, yeah, it's fast because now what it means is that if the developers are pushing their change, we are getting it to AWS immediately. In this case, I have this application. I have changed it. You won't see it immediately, right? But if I keep refreshing, if I just stay on this page and I keep refreshing, I will know it's going to change at some point. But yeah, you see, even before I left, it just showed, right? It showed up. So you can see TikTok update is here. But again, I mean, those pipelines can actually have events that triggers, tells you, what happened in the process. So that's one. We just did using CodeBuild. Let's go back to that repo. I don't know how easy it will be for me to show you something else. I don't know if we have the time, but it's all here. Let me see if I can actually squeeze the time out to show you, just so that you know that we can actually do both, even on the same pipeline. So you can see this is changing live, right? And we didn't really do anything. It's changing. We didn't have to do anything. Just changing that file in GitHub. We have it here. Now let's go back to our file. We also talked about CodeDeploy and we talked about an AppSpec file. I have one here, right? So AppSpec is here. And I'm saying, okay, this same file that we have is the same repo. We have a set of application. What if we deploy the same application to an EC2 instance, right? Maybe your own deployment model is not, maybe it's not CloudFront. Maybe you wanted to use, an EC2 machine, right? This is where it can happen also. You can have a pipeline that does that for you, right? So what we're going to do is that let's create an EC2 instance. So we'll go here, we'll start by creating an EC2 instance. In this case, I think I would like to do it in US West 2 because, no, that's going to be tricky because I have okay, so I'm just going to go into my AppSpec file, this one. I'm just going to change it to my region. That's just the only thing I'm going to do. So where am I now? I'm in US East 1, right? So I'm just going to do, I'm going to change this to US, I think it's East -1. Is that where I was? Okay, I'm just trying to be sure that I'm changing the right thing. So, so it's US East 1, right? So I'm going to change this one also to US East 1. Okay, I'm just going to commit the change. It's going to trigger a new build, but it doesn't matter, right? That's not really the goal. So let's go and create a new EC2 instance. So we're here. We're just it has triggered a new build, but that's not what I want to show. So we'll go here. We'll create a new EC2 instance. So let's create one. I have no EC2 instance running. I'm going to create one now. So I'm just going to launch one and call it TikTok what now? Web server. Okay, that's all that I want to call it. This is also going to give it like a name tag. So the name, this is going to be the name, TikTok web server, right? So it's Linux 2023. I don't need to do much. T3 micro. It's not. I'm not going to SSH into the machine, so I can go without a keep here. Yeah, I need it to be publicly available at this point. So I pretty much will need HTTP access from the internet just to show it works. Um, Existing security now I can use the launch wizard one to do the thing. And then the only thing I need to do is for the user data script, I also have as part of the repo a user data script. So it's this one that I just edited. So I'm going to copy this. And this thing is simple, right? It's just installing HTTPD. We've done this before. If you remember, we used to have like a what do you call it? We used to have like a script, a user data script where we install HTTPD, we start the server, blah, 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 just to show the welcome homepage, right? In this case, the most important thing is the machine has to have like the code deploy agent, which is what this script is doing, right? So I'm going to copy this script. I'm going to paste it as the user data script here, okay? So I'm just going to paste it here. So if you notice, it's a brand new machine. The only thing that is happening here is I'm basically just installing HTTPD, and I'm also installing the, what do you call it, the code deploy agent, because you need that for code deploy to work. So while that is working, I'm going to launch the EC2 instance. So I'm launching the EC2 instance. Now I know for code deploy, it will need 2 roles, right? So I'm going to create those roles now. So I'm going to go to IAM. So what I'm going to do is that, first of all, because I don't have a lot of time, I don't actually want to show, I don't want to simulate all the parts where it's going to break. So I'm just going to show you, ideally you need 2 roles. The EC2 machine, number 1, needs a role, right? For it to do code deploy stuff. And code deploy also needs a role, right? So those are the 2 things we need to do. We need to create first. So I'm here, I'm just going to create a role and call it EC2 code, no, so let me just call it here. So what is going to use the service? What is going to use the service is EC2. Remember, I want to create 2. One is for EC2, the other one is going to be non-EC2. So in this case, for the EC2 one, I'll do next. And then for the role, I'm just going to look for code. I'll type code deploy, right? So I'm going to do code deploy. So if you scroll through, you see there is really Amazon EC2 role for code for AWS code deploy. This is the one I need, right? So I'm going to do this one, and then I'm going to do next, right? I'm going to do next. So I'll call it. I'm just going to copy this name and use that name, right? Just to be specific. I'm going to go here and just do. So if you look at this policy, let's just create it. So let's create it. So we've created our roles, right? So I'm going to search for the role. It's here. If you check on it, it's basically some basic stuff, right? So what I'm going to do is that I'm also going to go back to that EC2 instance that's launching. I'm going to go to this one, and then I'm going to go to security. So in this case, I'm going to do instance. I'm going to go back to where was I just now? So I'm going to go here, actions, security, and then I'm going to edit the IAM role, right? I'll give you the role that I just created. So I'm going to give you this one. So Amazon EC2 role for AWS code deploy, right? So I need that. Then I'm going to do update IAM role, right? So once we have that already included, the next thing we want to now do is to create a code deploy role, right? Code deploy is going to use that one. So we're going to go also to IAM. So IAM, and then we'll create a new role. In this case, we'll go and create a new role, and we'll call it, who's going to use the role in this case? It's going to also be a service, but it's going to be a code deploy service. So it's code deploy that's going to use the service. There's code deploy for Lambda, for ECS, but I'm just going to use the first one, right? So it's next. It has the policy already selected for me, so it's fine. And then I'm just going to give it, I'm going to use this same name, right? So just to be specific on the naming, right? So I'm just going to paste it here. So create the role. And the role has been created. So we created 2 roles. The first one was for the EC2. We attached it to the EC2. And now we've created one for code deploy. So now that we have that, let's now go to code deploy, right? So go to code deploy, right? So we're going to go to code deploy. What do we need to do? We just first of all need to let's create an application. So we'll call it a TikTok application because that's where we are. So we'll do TikTok app. So application in this case, right? And the compute platform here, like you're aware, code deploy can deploy to many places, right? In this case, it's going to be EC2. We're going to create the application, right? And then in a particular application, there is really a deployment group that we need to create. It's like you're grouping, you're creating a group, right, for you to do your thing. More or less, how you can have multiple groups and deploy to them if you want. So here we're going to create a group, and we're just going to call it web server group, right? So we're going to do this. The service role, remember we created one, right? Code deploy also needs that. In this case, we'll do in place. We don't need to go into the details of many of the configurations that you can have, but in this case, we're just doing Amazon EC2 instance, right? And then we'll look for the group now. What's going to make that group? What's going to be comprised of that group? So in this case, we are saying anything that has a name tag of TikTok web server belongs to this group, right? So we've added them together, meaning we can have this group deployed once. So once we have that, now what's the next thing? I can basically leave many of the other things as default, right? I'm just going to disable load balancing because it's one EC2 instance, right? I don't need load balancing to be added on top of that. So I'm going to create a deployment group. Okay, now we have a deployment. We have a deployment group. We have an EC2 machine that has code deploy running on it with the right role, right? And then we have a code deploy also that has been created with the right role. The only thing that is missing now, how do we get this to life? Because we want it to be code driven, right? And that takes us to our AppSpec file, because now we have an AppSpec file here that says that, it tells you the files. It says copy this file to, the HTML directory, right? It says copy this other file to the same directory, copy this other file to the same directory. For the script, before install, run this, get all the dependencies. After you've done that, start the server. If the application is stopping, you can stop the server also. And if you go there are basic scripts that are here, right? But the whole idea is that if you check the script for install, very simple installation step. We're just installing HTTPD, right? For starting the server, we're also just starting the server, starting HTTPD, right? And then for stopping server, we're checking if it's there. If it's not there, we're just stopping it, right? If it's running already, we'll check if it's running. If it's running, we'll just stop it. This is like what happens when you're stopping the application. So you've given this set of script, you've referenced it in the AppSpec file, right? What next? We just now need to tie this to a pipeline, right? Remember that that machine has nothing. We don't have anything. All we have right now is something that is running on CloudFront, right? But so what we can do is that we can go to CodePipeline and modify the pipeline, right? And add more or less like a deploy step. So we'll go there, we'll go down. We can put it anywhere. You can see there's like stage. You can add stage, right? So maybe after the one that deploys to CloudFront, we also want it to deploy to EC2 machine, right? So we'll say, let's add a deploy stage. Call it add stage. It's a deploy stage, and then we'll now add an action group, right? In this case, we'll say deploy to what now? To EC2, right? So we'll do EC2 because that's what we want to do. So what's the action group in this case? And we'll type deploy. There is like AWS CodeDeploy that we can use. So the pipeline supports many things, but in this case, we are showing CodeBuild, we're showing CodeDeploy. And here it says which, obviously this is the region, which artifact is going to take. In this case, I needed to still take the source artifact, right? Nothing has changed, so it's still the source, meaning whatever was pulled from GitHub should be sent to CodeDeploy, right? What's the application name? I've already created an application, TikTok application. So I'm just going to choose that one. And then I'm going to choose which deployment group am I going to use. I'm going to use that one, the one that I have. Variable namespace, I don't really need anything to be there, right? So think about it. We had CodeBuild, right? The build step before. Remember, the build step, you can use it for many things. You can use it for test, you can use it for building. In this case, we used it for simple deployment. And then we're also introducing a deploy step that actually deploys something to EC2 instance, right? So with this done, we're just going to save the pipeline, save the changes, right? We've saved the changes now. So what's next? Let's see what happens. So we're just going to go back to GitHub and go back to our demo index.html file. So we'll go back here. This is where we're testing from. We did add this update before, right? So let's remove it. So we're going to remove it. So we're saying removed. I'm just going to save this and say removed the header, like more or less like removed the update, right? So I'm saying removed update. And then I'm going to commit the changes, right? So the change is going to be committed, and then let's see what happens in the TikTok pipeline. So this is already done. Source is always very fast. It's pulled the change from GitHub, right? It's doing its thing. The build step is running. I don't know if this has completed, but let me see. But let's give it time. So when the source is done, the build is going to run, and then after that time, we are saying, please deploy a copy of it into EC2 into EC2, right? We did deploy once from S3 CloudFront. That's like a pattern we know. And then in this case, again, we're also creating a new kind of deployment, right? But again, your pipeline is your pipeline. There's no hard and fast rule. It's basically, these things are driven based on real life requirements, like what is needed and what has to be done, right? So the source is completed. The build is the one running. So let's give it some time. Because again, one thing I also know is that remember that like I said, everything is streamed down, right? Everything in the AWS is really, and that's why there is always the talk of least privileged access. Everything here must be given the permission for them to do what they need to do. One thing I know of is that this pipeline right now can do many things. So let's go and look for the let's go settings, for example. This is the role CodePipeline is using to do whatever it's doing. So if I go and check that role right now, so I can also wait for this process to fail. I can also wait, right? So this has passed, but this has failed. And I know why, even without going to check. Because the thing is that we introduced CodeBuild and CodeDeploy into CodePipeline, but we did not adjust the roles that CodePipeline had, right? So if you see it here, for example, if you look at all the roles, it has one for CodeBuild, it has one for code connections, which is how the GitHub integration was done, right? It also has one for the, more or less like the service role for CodePipeline. But one thing it doesn't have is basically, it doesn't have anything that has to do with CodeDeploy. It doesn't. So what I'm just going to do is that again, ideally you are meant to prune these policies down as much as you want. But for me here, I'm just going to use CodeDeploy. So I'm going to look for CodeDeploy, right? So again, I'll just use full access. But ideally, it depends on what you want to do with CodeDeploy. You pick the right permissions, right? We can't be going through that in this call. So I'm just going to add this permission, and then I'm going to go to the pipeline. And then this stage that failed, Let's see if I can even find what's happening. Let's see if maybe there is a place where it's saying why it failed. Um, yeah, you can actually see. It's clear. It's saying that this service rule, right, the one that code pipeline assumed, does not have, it doesn't have the permission to create a deployment, right? Because it's like it's creating a deployment on behalf of CodeBuild, and it doesn't have the permission. Just so you know. So if I go back now and I try to retry this, let me retry stage and see what happens. Now that we have given it permission. So let's wait and see. What are we doing? We're basically building, you're building a pipeline that is driven by code, right? Not from what you not basically from. So, and it's easy, right? Because if you have that, it means you can actually watch, you can more or less like control, there's so many things you can do. But while that is happening, let's go and check CodeBuild itself and see what's actually happening in CodeBuild. So if you go there, what we care about is the deployment, right? We created an application, more or less like a deployment group, and now an actual deployment is happening from CodeBuild, right? From CodePipeline, right? The things you care about is the events. These are some of the things you need to check to be sure that things are working as expected. So let's just give it some time. Let's give it some time. And also, I think this also might take time, and I think I know the reason. The reason is because when we did create the EC2 instance, um, when we did create the EC2 instance, we added the role afterwards, right? We didn't really add the role as at the time of creation. So I think I also ran into this kind of issue at some point. So this might stay long, right? It's just going to stay here. We pretty much might never know what's the problem. But again, it's just that right now that EC2 instance, if I actually want to, I think I did mention it in the comment, just so you know, if you run through an issue like this, I put here in the AppSpec file, I did put a comment. Please, you can check this log, the code deploy agent log, and it can actually tell you what is happening. Because if you go now, if we actually go and check that log, you see that whatever problem is having from deploying, right? And you're going to see it in this log, right? So the only thing I'm just going to do is that even if we wait, nothing is it's going to take time. Let me see where it is. It's still here. It doesn't show like anything is happening. That's the log. If you check that code deploy agent log, you will see all the issues. But just for a quick fix, I'm going to go in there to this machine. I'm just going to reboot the instance, basically. So I'm going to reboot it. So let's give it time to reboot. Um, let's give it time to reboot. It's reboot. There was a reboot, and let's see what happens now. That let's see if this is the case. Still going to take a while. I don't know if this is going to fail. Maybe it's the next one, but let me see if it's not going to work. Um, I definitely know this is not at the code build aspect of it. So let's just refresh and see. Let me go if I can. Let me see if it's something I can stop. Let me see if I can cancel it. Stop the execution. You can do stop and wait or stop and abandon. I'm just going to stop and abandon. And then I'm going to, let me see if it has failed. I'm going to retry the stage again and see if it's going to create a brand new deployment. So let me see if I go back to where we were. Let's see if there's a fresh deployment that is being created. Did it even create one again? I'm not even sure if it created another one, but let's see. View the events. It's still pending. Okay. Let me go to the EC2 instance, connect. Let me see. Let me connect. I know this is also going to fail, right? It's going to fail. It's fine because it doesn't have security that allows SSH, right? I mean, these are all basic stuff that we know by now. So I'm just going to go into the launch wizard. But let me also check just to be sure. It did fail this time again. So let's see what failed. Okay, it's already in progress. I don't know if that means it's actually doing its thing, but let's see. Deployments. Oh, it did succeed this time. So it did succeed. So I think that reboot fixed it. So I don't need to do anything. But if you go and check, basically, you see the events. The events are really, you see there's like a validate service, application starts, application. There's so many of these things. It depends on the level you are. But at some point, you would see, you will need to know, exactly what these roles are playing. But honestly, it's not something we can cover in just one sitting, right? So how do we test if it's working? We'll just go back to our EC2 instance, for example, and we'll pick the public IP, right? Let's pick the public IP. So we're just going to click this one, copy this, and that's the public IP. And then I'm just going to do HTTP this, and then paste it. And then we have it, right? So the application is up in two ways, right? So we've used one code pipeline deployed to both S3 and CloudFront. We've also deployed to an EC3, EC2 machine. The question is that what happens if we change the file, right? So that's where the magic should happen, because now we want to say we want to do this and say update all, right? So we want to do something like this and say we want to edit this file and say update all, right? Let's see what happens. So we'll say update all, right? All this is being driven by code. So I'm just going to say update everything, right? Update everything, right? So, and then we're just going to commit the changes in. And then once that is done, we now have two places to look at, right? Without doing anything manually. So obviously I know this would have changed since because we did revert it, right? So it means this is going to show the same thing, this is going to show the same thing. I think all we just now need to do is a wait game. Let's wait for both of them to change, right? But you can see just on this lab how we're already building something very nice in the sense that it's all driven from code, it's deploying to multiple places. So all the stress we've gone through before to it's not going to be like that. But ideally it's good for you to know exactly how things fit in, and then you can begin to add the tools that makes those things easy, right? Because this is we've done it manually. We've actually launched an EC2 instance before. We've installed a server into it. The same thing with CloudFront, right? We've put files in S3 buckets. We've created a connection. But now in the real world, the developers are handling the application, and then you are responsible for everything that happens afterwards, like the deployment, the testing of the application, the validation of the service to make sure it's working as expected. So there's just a lot that can happen, right? But let's see what happens. Let's go back to our pipeline. So if I check my pipeline, it's in progress. Obviously, that was done from that build that happened. This failed because I think I reran the deployment again. But let's now see like a complete flow. So in this case, it's building, right? So if this succeeds, then this should be good to go. This one should be good to go. And then if the second one succeeds, this should also be good to go. So let's wait. So this has succeeded. So let's refresh this one and see. So this is here. So update all. It has appeared here, but it's not going to be here yet, right? Because there's still one step in the build. Oh, it was even faster than I thought. So the EC2 updated. What do you call it? The CloudFront also updated, right? So and if you check it at the end of the day, it's done. It's done. Every other thing can, be added more or less like how you want to do the. Right now we're doing in place deployment, right? So more or less like just all at once. But ideally, at some point, you'll be learning the different kinds of deployment that are there. Many other things that you can do. Here, we're using the build step to just do a deployment, but you can also break them. Have something that does the build, does the test, and then orchestrate everything with the pipeline, right? With that said, I'm just going to do more or less like the things that I need to do. I'm just going to, first of all, go to my launch wizard, edit. In fact, I'm just going to terminate the EC2 instance. There's no point trying to, but again, we've shown it's here. This one is also here. So both of them are running. There's nothing else to show other than just terminate the EC2 instance. So it's gone. I'm just going to get rid of this one. That's the only thing that needs to go for the most part. And then my distribution also, I don't need it. So I'm just going to, in fact, I think I used to have one here. I'm going to delete this one. And then this one, I'm going to disable it, right? So disable. And then once it's disabled, it means you can't see it from the URL. I'm just going to wait and delete it. While I'm there, I'm going to go to my S3 bucket. Remember, all these things, I didn't push any file. I didn't push any file to any of the machines. I didn't push to S3, neither did I push to the EC2 machine, right? It's just to tell you how powerful it is to use many of the tools that AWS has. And people will come and tell you, other people have their, just so you know, AWS is not many of the things. So the pipelines that I'm showing you, the build process, these are all AWS native tools. But people have a way they do it. Some companies use other tools, Terraform, Helm, Hago CD, all that are things that I do. But again, you need to understand how AWS does it, right? For the most part. So here I'm just going to go, I'm going to empty my buckets because I can't delete the bucket without emptying it. So again, you can see I'm doing this thing manually, right? But if I really wanted to show this flow end to end, many of these things I would have created them with infrastructure as code, which is what we talked about the last time. Create them with infrastructure as code. And then even the pipeline, the code build, everything will be infrastructure as code. And you can imagine just one, what do you call it? One thing will just rule them all, right? So you can have like an IAC that sets up everything. And then when you push your code, you are just seeing it live. So there's just a lot that you can do in this world, okay? And in the world of AWS, there's just so many possibilities. And that's why many of the big companies use them, right? They are very good at what they do, and they power many of the large corporations that are out there. If they are not good, if they don't have the right services, people will not be using them, okay? So, and it's a skill. If you have it, like I've always mentioned, you would always be in need. Somebody needs you. That's the thing. So for this one, I think it's fine. Like you're aware, code, but like I mentioned, many of these things are serverless. So in as much as no build is going on, I'm not going to incur any cost, right? But after this call, because we're running out of time for the recording, I'm just going to go back. So ideally, just delete everything you created. So all the rows that I created that I don't need, I'm going to delete them. I'm going to delete all the build, the deploy. I'm just going to get rid of them, right? But for the most part, if I refresh this page, it's not going to show again. It's gone. Yeah, it's gone. I think the CDN has been disabled. Maybe I just now need to more or less like delete it, right? So I'm just going to, I think it's still deploying. So I'm just going to wait. But if you go back to this one is gone, right? It's just going to be there forever. It's not going to open. But this one, I just need to wait for CDN to be done. Then I'm going to delete it, right? I think that is it. Every other thing I'm going to do after this call is clean up. But please, if you go through this hands-on, just be in the habit of going back to your account, do all the cleanup that you need to clean, whatever you need to clean up. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And that brings us to the end of this class because I won't be going to systems manager at this point. So we can go to our quiz, and then yeah, next time we can obviously continue from where we stopped. So we basically saw a pipeline, right? And I said pipeline is what you make of it. It's there. It's an orchestration tool. You can do whatever you want to do. You saw how we use CodeBuild to do both a build and a deploy, but in the real world, some people have build step, test step, validation, whatever step you want to build, right? It depends on your workflow. There's no one size fits all. Nobody's going to tell you how to do things. There is like steps, recommended steps on how to do things, but sometimes it's usually the use case that decides what is eventually used. Okay.